Thank you very much, sir, for that wonderful talk and really a lot of thought-provoking ideas and messages on that. Should we now go to the discussion, Dr. Sandhya?
Yes.
Shall we, go to the discussion? I can see Dr. Claire is there. We have Dr. Shashank Joshi also, and we have Dr. Uday Thanawala. So we'll begin with the questions which are in the chat box and then go further. So the first question I had, and that was to Dr. Uday Thanawala, what is the optimum dose of this myoinositol to D-chiroinositol? Does it matter?
Uday, you are muted. Uday, you are muted. We can't hear you. You're still muted, Uday.
Yeah. Okay. So, the recommended the thing is 40:1, but I have something here where it was compared with the other doses of the other ratios were confirmed, like 500 milligrams plus 50 milligrams, there is 10:1 and other doses. So what this is, in the other ratios, they have shown higher pregnancy rate, positive effect of the cytoplasm, higher pregnancy and live birth rates, lower risk of ovarian hyperstimulation, decreased testosterone levels, etc. But as yet, nothing is concretely come out of it. So the other doses have been evaluated, and there is a decrease in insulin levels and decreased BMI. But as yet, nothing has concretely been given as a thing that this particular ratio has to be used. So right now, we stick to the 40:1, but other ratios are being evaluated.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Sandhya.
Yeah, I had a question to Dr. Uday. Do you routinely do LFT levels in the women who are on metformin during pregnancy? Because many women later on, they develop, at least in my practice, I've seen a lot of cholestasis in pregnancy. And sometimes they read on the net and they say it could be attributed to the metformin which I am taking and it causes a liver disorder. So do we, is it recommended or should we do it routinely to our patients? What do you recommend?
I'm not doing it routinely. Only if the woman does complain of something, then we do it. And if they develop even any signs of cholestatic jaundice, then we have to stop the metformin.
Maybe Dr. Joshi could
suppose so.
Give us an opinion on that, sir.
No recommendation for routine LFT screening in pregnancy.
And any link with cholestasis?
No, not really. No documented.
Not documented.
Okay.
So we have the next question, and this is from Dr. Claire. She's actually asked this question. Do we have data on the children whose mothers took metformin during pregnancy? What is the effect? And she says that there was a small study reporting hypertension in the offspring. Dr. Uday, would you like to take that?
Well, I'm not aware of the study which Claire is referring to, but yes, I had one study which I had evaluated on women who are taking metformin, and in breastfeeding, if they've taken the metformin, was there effect on anything on the children? But there was no effect demonstrated. And I believe, of course, the studies which has shown that even after 8 or 9 years, there is increase in the subcutaneous fat, but it really has not created any problems with the babies, because the visceral fat, etc., doesn't go up. So that is the only information which I have. I don't know if Claire would like to add something to that.
Dr. Claire?
No, look, I don't, but I think it's a very important one if we're actually going to start advocating for the use of metformin in later pregnancy. The data, if you don't mind, it seemed to me to suggest the lack of effect when it was started in the first trimester seemed to indicate that the benefit was there if it was started earlier. Did you get that impression when you reviewed the literature?
Well, what I reviewed probably was women who were on metformin and they continued this thing. It is like that is the data which we reviewed, and in the first trimester, of course, they said that there's been no effect on the children. And the study which I was quoting about breastfeeding is in later pregnancy, when they continued even in lactation, it was reported that none of the children had any delay in either growth or development milestones. And
Yeah. How often do you start metformin, in the first trimester? Most of our patients are on it, and with the question is to continue. I don't think we are starting it in the first trimester, are we?
No, we are generally it is the patients who conceive on metformin, whether they're ovulation induction or any other thing. They are the ones who just and we continue them at least for the first 3 months. And I think none of these children have shown any effect, if that is what Claire is hinting at, of starting it in the first trimester.
Of course, the big thing about long-term metformin is B12 deficiency, and we need to monitor these patients on long-term metformin because B12 deficiency is probably fairly important in pregnancy.
Do we not just supplement the B12, or do we have to monitor the levels? Dr. Joshi, sir, would you like to take that?
B12 deficiency in India is very common, and we routinely supplement B12 with metformin. But what Claire makes is a compelling point. 3 things we need to understand. One is that, metformin in GDM is a very different kettle of fish. Metformin continued when somebody conceives is a different kettle of fish. We cannot mix and match the data of the two. They are two independent and interdistinct data. The data in the first trimester on metformin has its own challenges and doesn't have high quality of evidence. It is an emerging evidence. Data on the second trimester and third trimester on metformin is much better and more compelling. The third thing is that we are now increasingly recognizing that gestational diabetes is nothing but glucose intolerance of type 2 diabetes during pregnancy. As that is ensuing, metformin often might become a drug of choice in the next decade in that space. As far as the B12 supplementation is concerned, you know that a large population of Indian population is vegetarian, and we routinely tend to supplement them. In fact, B12 supplementation is far more important by some data published by Dr. Yagnik's work compared to even folic acid supplementation. And often they are co-supplemented.
So I don't think there are any more questions in the chat box, Sarita.
And I can't see any more questions in the chat box, but this is only the panelists and so what about the audience questions? Maybe the technical team can let us know. Are there any questions from the audience? No. One more question I had to Dr. Claire was that how does this phenotypes impact our clinical treatment? Does it matter, or are we going to change the treatment based on the phenotypes any more than what we are doing based on the symptoms?
I don't think the data's there. That's what my talk was about, that it's so incredibly muddy because the definitions have changed over time. And whilst we may recognize the metabolic syndrome at any one point in time and treat that as it needs to be treated, we actually don't know if metabolic syndrome in PCOS is associated with the adverse cardiac events that we see in metabolic syndrome in men, for instance. And I think we could speculate that there's some protective factor there, that we're actually still struggling to say that these women are at increased risk. I'd be very interested to hear what Dr. Joshi thinks about that.
So Claire, you are raising a point which is hotly debated 2 weeks back at the European Society of Cardiology. If I can have access to her email through Madhuri, I will send you 2 papers which were presented at the European Society of Cardiology, where they feel now that there is reasonable consideration that women who had PCOS are a clear-cut risk factor for cardiovascular disease, and their outcomes are poorer. There were 2 cohorts which were presented at the ESC virtually last 2 weeks back. One was a Dutch cohort, and one was, I think, a Spanish cohort. And in all of them, these were women of PCOS between 40 and 60 had adverse cardiac outcomes, including mortality. So it is seeming, the data is seeming to trend that it could be deleterious.
Right. And Dr. Joshi, sir, you said that, do you think that well-treated PCOS is a lower risk factor for COVID, and therefore we should treat all our patients and optimize their condition?
So normalizing androgens might make a difference, but we don't have any outcome data in COVID. COVID is still so muzzy and so early and virgin, that we don't have any data generated. All this is speculative. But one thing is clear cut, that we have, because I'm on the Maharashtra COVID task force, women who have died. We have looked at them and many of them have been PCOS. So we have done audits, death audits. So we have all the retrospective death audits. In COVID, we don't have autopsy data. We have some necropsy data and we have some death audits. But we will need to do this prospective. But in the animal data, there is very good data. As I showed you the experiment which the group did, there's some excellent, compelling data, and there's a very good pathobiological basis for the explanation.
So I think we don't have any questions from the audience. And is there? Let's have one closing remark from all our panelists before we close the session. Any message to the audience, Dr. Claire? You first.
Well, I've really enjoyed this session. I've certainly learnt a lot about COVID, and so that was absolutely fantastic. And thanks for stimulating me to think about myo-inositol. So I'd like to acclaim my co-panelists. Thank you.
Dr. Thanawala?
Yeah, thank you, Claire. So I must thank you for putting that phenotype there. So you have to tell me that would you use metformin and inositols in A, B, C, or D? But I think it is still in a lot of speculation, you have to individualize treatment, but basically whatever helps to treat the woman, we have to do.
My take on that vaccinate women independent of PCOS, but if they have PCOS, give them a priority and ensure that they're double vaccinated and treat them like a male phenotype, because they can have deleterious consequences. What happens in India typically is, if a whole family is affected with COVID, the woman is often ignored by the clinician. They feel that it won't deteriorate. And she's often left at home, and we have seen that they have got hypoxic and they have died. That should not happen. So my only take-home message is ensure that women with PCOS get a priority in vaccination. It's a clear-cut comorbidity. There's no question asked about that. That every woman and every human being on planet Earth is vaccinated, so that we can all meet and we can all have our virtual to physical meetings back again. But that's going to take probably a while. It's still a year away, I feel. And that is the interesting area for research, looking at outcomes of PCOS women with COVID and how they behave versus normal women.
So I think that was a very valuable message, sir. Take home message and food for thought. We were thinking that maybe things will open up soon, but I think we have to relook at the whole situation and really take it easy and slow.
Thank you very much, and I'd like to thank the organizers, Dr. Durusha and Dr. Madhuri Patil, for giving us this opportunity to moderate this session on behalf of Sandhya and myself, and a big thank you to all our panelists for their very, very valuable messages.